Ryan, psychedelics, net positive or net negative for society?
Net positive, I'd say.
Hmm.
I think we've got enough evidence now from thousands of years of human use and in the last 70 years of Western science and medicine kind of validating the mechanisms of action and the clinical benefit to know that psychedelics do really have the potential to kind of revolutionize mental health treatments in this century, if not this next decade.
We share the sentiment.
Yeah.
I think it's always interesting because Jamie and I, and I'm sure you don't mind me saying, are avid proponents of psychedelics, having had our own experiences in non-clinical settings.
Yeah.
Your experience relates to both clinical and non-clinical, as I understand it. Can we talk about the differences? Because one of the things I struggle with is when we're trying to ascertain the benefit of a psychedelic, but we're conducting the study in an environment that's unnatural, I don't believe we're seeing the full potential because the set and the setting of the experience is not the way that it would have perhaps always been done. And it doesn't, I don't believe, I'm inexperienced with a clinical setting, but doesn't allow for the participant to fully drop into the experience. So I'd like to understand what your experience has been with clinical settings and settings where studies are being conducted.
Yeah, so to kind of paint the picture of what it looks like in a clinical setting. So we work at Hammersmith Hospital, which is just on the other side of the river from here, and we've got a clinical research facility. And essentially they're hospital beds and rooms which are sectioned off, so they're entire kind of like suites. And those rooms are used for a whole host of like medical and drug development trials. So the COVID vaccine trials happen there. Many oncology drugs are developed there. Different medicines are developed within that space. And over the last 10 to 15 years, our group has kind of acquired some of those rooms and started to do the world's first clinical studies with psychedelics. So when an individual is in that kind of room, what you have is a hospital bed, you have a desk. And we decided very early on that it was really important to kind of change the way the room looked, not only because, it was quite jarring being in a kind of hospital bunker, taking these kind of profound, mind-changing drugs, but also because we do think it's important the set and setting be optimized to some degree for the experience. So now the kind of mainstay of what we have is a room which has plants like these inside it. It has Himalayan rock salt lamps. It has mood lighting, and it also has ambient music. And sometimes we can also offer odors like Palo Santo or different smells. So we really try to create somewhat of like a sensory supportive environment. And it's definitely not the jungle. It's not anywhere close to it. One of the things that I think is really important to kind of say, though, is that when somebody takes these clinical journeys, whether that be in kind of the wild or in a clinical research setting, the journey is predominantly kind of focused inwards. So we often use eye masks and headphones. And so I do believe that kind of, at least for the journey, part of the journey, irrespective of where you are in the world or what environment you're in, because the work is going on inside of you and your eyes are closed and you're listening to music, the actual external immediate environment for that journey is not as important. What I think people struggle to understand is the integration bit after. Where do you integrate that experience? Is it better to do that in nature, or is it better to do that in a hustle and bustling city like London?
Beyond environment on that point, it's also about the container that you're stepping back into, because a lot of the cultures that still practice with these psychoactive plants, when somebody returns from such an experience, they're entering into a community that has an understanding of how to support the integration of the lessons that are learned. It's normal for that society. Whereas someone that perhaps lives in London that goes to the Amazon, has an experience with ayahuasca or peyote or whatever it may be, comes back into a culture that not only doesn't understand how to support the integration of that experience, but very often demonizes that experience as taking a drug or something that actually that's quite negative. So far from being open to integrate, what you actually end up doing is hiding the fact that you've even had the experience, which actually stems the ability to integrate it. So I'd be really interested actually to learn on that point. How do you support integration?
So yeah, integration is, I think, probably one of the most important aspects of psychedelic medicine that gets overlooked. It's the reason why when people go to a festival and take psychedelics, they don't necessarily cure their mental health illnesses. The integration bit is really where a lot of the work is done around what it means to have done that and what that means for your future. So in kind of clinical psychedelic settings, what we often have after the kind of therapy is integration sessions, which may or may not be tied into different types of psychotherapy. So a study that I'm involved in setting up and leading on is really integrating CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a way of kind of retraining your biases and your thoughts around your behaviors, and utilizing the kind of flexibility that psychedelics give you to retrain kind of maladaptive behaviors and relearn or learn for the first time adaptive ones. So that's sort of how the individual therapist and patient relationship works, is that you have for at least 12 weeks, if not longer, this kind of follow-up period of psychotherapy supporting the individual. But what a lot of conversation has happened recently is about these communities. And so really excellent organization called PsyPal, which is basically a patient advisory network of individuals who've gone through psychedelic clinical trials. And they set up these monthly facilitation groups for anyone that's come out of university research or clinical trials research. And they'll have like a monthly open circle where they'll meet individuals like them who've been through these experiences. And every month will be a different theme. And there's a beautiful analogy of like a tree. And over the 12-month period, they start the roots and they kind of build the tree and they go to the branches, and different psychological domains and processes are kind of explored. And
Amazing.
and so there's a real sense that psychedelics may actually take away a lot of accountability from central mental health services in the future, and perhaps lead to more community-led and person-driven healing.
And when we're talking about psychedelics specifically, the substances that you are working with, can you name what they are and what some of the, I guess, the benefits or the experiences that people might have?
Yeah, I guess like the most common one we research at the moment is psilocybin. Psilocybin is a chemical name for the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. So there's about 200 different like types of magic mushrooms around the world that contain these compounds being used all over the world. A lot of people often go back to Maria Sabina in Mexico as being the first person, but there's, you know, evidence all around the world. We have psilocybin cubantus, which grows here in the UK. We have them kind of basically in all regions of the world. So that's kind of one of the main ones. About 180 clinical trials now being done with psilocybin. And just 3 weeks ago, some data came out of the kind of the biggest psychedelic psilocybin clinical trial to date. It was in treatment-resistant depression, done by Compass Pathways, a biotech. And what they found was that there was significant difference between the placebo groups, so the patients that got a sugar pill, versus the ones that got 25 milligrams of psilocybin, which is a very large dose, about 5 grams of mushroom.
I've got to say that.
Yeah.
If someone gave me a sugar pill and someone gave me 5 grams, how would you not know that you're on 5 grams?
Exactly. This is one of the issues with medical development.
Just for context for everyone, 5 grams is what Terence McKenna coined as a hero dose. I mean, you can take 0.5 grams, which is a tenth of that, and it'd be very obvious that you've ingested something that alters your state, right?
Yeah. So these individuals that take it are really experiencing the full might of like a trip. It's not easy. It's not necessarily fun.
Yeah.
Often it's challenging, and they're really kind of seeing everything they might need to see, or maybe they don't want to even see. So yeah, really powerful experience. Then the results of this trial are really kind of the first. Well, it's kind of the penultimate stage before the regulators will decide whether or not this could be a licensed medicine. So there's another trial due out next year, which tries to solve this issue that you mentioned of placebo control. So what they're doing in the second trial due out next year is having 3 different doses. So one of them will be 1 milligram, which is kind of subperceptual. It's at 0.5 grams sort of level. Then you have 10 milligrams, and then we'll have 25 milligrams. And so in this kind of stepwise way, because it's impossible to blind psychedelic experiences.
For sure.
They will try to understand if there's a dose-dependent effect on clinical outcome. And if that shows that there is, then there's clear signs of like an efficacy signal.
It's really interesting, I guess, kind of having been involved in this world and these conversations for probably 5 or so years now myself. I actually had a conversation with one of the former co-founders of Compass on the first ever podcast I had back in 2020. And we were still talking about the potential for re-regulation and rescheduling and, whether it's decriminalisation, legalisation, whatever it might look like. Where are we at in that kind of process right now? What are I've seen you talk recently around kind of where things are heading, but from where you're sat within, very entrenched in this world, where are we at, and what are maybe some of the things that could unfold in the next sort of year to 2 years?
We'll be right back to the episode after a very quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Whoop. The all-new Whoop is here. The only wearable that turns your health and fitness data into personalized guidance, now 7% smaller, with over 14 days of battery life. I've been using Whoop to stay on top of my recovery, training, and stress during busy periods, and the insights have genuinely changed the way I look after my body, how I train, and my overall health and well-being. Whoop includes a heart screener with on-demand ECG readings so you can check in on your heart anytime and share the results with your healthcare provider. It also includes HealthSpan, a new feature that demystifies the aging process and shows how your daily habits impact your pace of aging, as well as hormonal insights for personalized guidance throughout your cycle or pregnancy for women. It's the only wearable that gives you a truly comprehensive view of your body, designed to help you improve your performance, longevity, and overall health. You can join Whoop now at join.whoop.com/human nature. That's join.whoop.com/human nature.
If we're looking at the UK, we're like the last people in the world that will actually ever regulate this stuff. It's actually preposterous, because it was really British scientists that have basically invented or discovered the most potent antidepressant ever for humans. That research came out from British scientists at British universities, and British patients are not able to access that. Today, this morning, Germany actually made a vote to allow psilocybin for compassionate cases for patients with treatment-resistant depression, based off some of our research and some of Compass Pathways research. That's the first country in Europe to allow for compassionate use, despite that last phase 3 trial not being done or the results being out. In the US, there's access to psilocybin now under certain circumstances. In Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Czech Republic, in the Netherlands, in large swathes of Latin and South America. The UK, we are kind of an isle on our own in terms of policy. So I would say we're not going to make any changes in scheduling until that last clinical trial's out. Once that's out, then a discussion will be had later down the line in a more broad way about decriminalisation of drugs, because there are 2 different conversations right now. There's a medicalisation of these illegal drugs, which is really kind of, I'd say, the most important thing from a public health perspective, is we have this growing mental health crisis, and the government are only able to do whatever they're elected to do within the electorate. Unfortunately, in the UK, there is still a lot of stigma around psychoactive drugs. And so we can only do what the people want. So if the people don't want this to happen as strongly as maybe they advocate for in the US or Canada, for example, then legislation on decriminalisation won't change.
It's incredibly lazy and ignorant to classify substances that are so different under the same classification. When you talk about
Yeah.
psilocybin or DMT or Iboga in the same category as cocaine, heroin, etc., for me, it's just preposterous.
In fact,
it's insane.
Yeah, heroin and cocaine are actually classified as less restricted currently than psilocybin. So there's you have class A, B, and C, which is the UK's way of putting a penal code towards drug classes, so you get different amounts of incarcerations and penalties. But you have schedules as well where they sit in medical contexts. So right now, psilocybin, MD, LSD sit in Schedule 1, and that means that under current law, they're highly addictive and there's no evidence of medical benefit. In Schedule 2, they're still highly addictive, but some evidence of medical benefit. So heroin sits in that class because dimorphine is prescribed daily in hospitals. Cocaine sits in that class because there is some evidence for its potential in like dental surgery. But yeah, it's actually a joke.
The concept of being addictive, you know, psilocybin, I find that it's after ceremony with mushrooms, or even after, you know, taking a low dose and going for a walk, it's the last thing I want to do the next day. And there's anecdotal evidence from me as an individual, but that's an experience I share with many people. Other psychedelics, like ayahuasca, I haven't done ayahuasca for 10 years. However, the impact on me was profound. It's the opposite of addictive. Quite honestly, it's directly opposite, as opposed to some of those other drugs. But friends that have had their lives ruined and been addicted by the other drugs that you mentioned. But to consider that they're less restricted than psychedelics.
It's
baffling.
It doesn't make sense. In fact, it was only about maybe 3 weeks ago, the ACMD, which is the Advisory Council for Misuse of Drugs, which basically advises the government on where drug classification should go. They and others submitted some evidence to basically try to get psilocybin and these drugs in Schedule 2. So if it's in Schedule 2, it means at universities like the one I work at, we don't have to apply for special licenses, which take a long time to get, cost a lot of money, and we have to lock the drugs in these special safes, whereas you can get your cocaine and heroin just over from the pharmacy very easily in hospitals without a special license. So we just asked very simply, can it be possible that the government reschedules psilocybin and LSD and MDMA only for medical research purposes into Schedule 2? And we asked for this about 3-4 years ago, and about a month ago, Dame Diana Johnson, who's the Minister for Crime and something else, basically said they replied saying that they support in principle the rescheduling of these drugs for medical research purposes. So that is the first signal in the history of the UK since the 1970s, but the government are now taking active steps with regulation and policy, because they're now beginning to understand that there's something maybe useful here, which is so it's not all bad. It's slowly, it's just mostly bad.
For those that haven't had an experience, and it's probably a question that I get asked a lot whenever this topic comes up. Because many people are intimidated to step into ceremony or to try these kind of these substances. From your own experience, if you don't mind going there, I'd like to understand for people, how would you describe the experience, and how would you describe the impact that the experience has had on you as an individual?
So I'd say like one of the biggest experiences I've ever had with psychedelics was this year in January, and I spoke to Jamie about it quite soon after. But so I went in there after maybe studying psychedelics for 6-7 years, thinking I sort of knew.
Had you had an experience up to that point?
I had had experiences, but nothing really like the one in January. So I was in a retreat center in Latin America, and it was in a group setting, in kind of a shamanistic, culturally embedded way, and I was really kind of ready, I think, to have the experience. So I entered it with a mindset that I didn't really know what it was that I needed to work on. So one of the things that you always get asked when you take part in these experiences is to kind of set an intention. And I really didn't have an intention. So the shaman told me to ask the mushroom to show me what I needed to see. So I took this cup, which had it was called lemon tech. So it's a way of increasing the metabolism of the mushroom. And then the sun was setting. It was a gorgeous location by the Pacific Ocean. And I put the eye mask on, and then suddenly, I guess my body started kind of like feeling all of these kind of like warmth in terms of like energy. And I could feel like something big was about to happen. I was kind of scared, to be honest with you. I was a bit like, what the fuck have I just done? And like, what have I signed up to? And I was
can't get off the ride.
And I was literally like, oh dear. And then I was just having all of these like paranoias, like, what is my job? Like, what am I doing here? Then I just thought, right, you know what, let's just strap in and see where it takes me. So I made that decision, and then immediately after, I mentally decided that I was ready to go. My body went into this kind of like, I'd say like a fit. So I ended up kind of like thrashing and moving around, really kind of a lot of energy. Like it started off in my feet, and then it kind of moved up through my body to my head, back down at my tongue. My face was moving. It was pretty insane. And then I put my hand up and spoke to the shaming woman, was like, am I okay? Like, I've never had this before. She was like, yeah, sometimes a lot of people move, and you just got to let it move through you. So yeah, I had this really physical kind of like release, I'd say, from like all of my body. Like I felt like all of this kind of like weight and stress was being ripped out of my like muscles and bones. It was pretty terrifying. Like I actually felt like I was potentially having a seizure at some points. So it wasn't pretty. And then once that had subsided, then the kind of psychological work started, and I met my granddad, who had never met before, my dad's father, who died when my dad was young. And we had a conversation which was bizarre, because I mean, talking to any dead grandparent is bizarre. It was beautiful and interesting. And then I thought, you know what, whatever this might be, whether it's a figment of my imagination or a portal to the afterworld, I'm just going to go with it. Then I met God as well, or some kind of higher power. I met a lot of people in my life and had lots of conversations that I hadn't had, that maybe I needed to. And then I really genuinely believed that the world had ended. So towards the end of the trip, I was under the impression that me drinking that drink had changed the world forever. And I thought that was very real. And even when we were having dinner afterwards, we weren't allowed our phones. I thought like time and space had shifted, and that we were just kind of the last survivors almost. It was near psychotic at some points. And then I managed to really just reintegrate what all of that meant and the meanings behind, you know, the world ending and meeting God and like the lessons from it. But it was I kind of finished that experience by saying I thought I knew, but I really didn't. So I really don't think there is a way to describe the experience, because it can do to you things that you can't even compute.
Yeah, I think there's that ineffability, you know, that is innate to the experience, and that's why it's so hard to put into words, because it's also so individual. Everything is so individual. Of people in your field professionally, I guess it's a two-part question. Have many of them had experiences like that? And do you think more of them should, if not, in terms of, I suppose, reconciling the intellectual, academic understanding of the work and what you're doing and the true sort of embodied experience of it?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. My personal opinion is I feel like it's important to have experienced some sort of an altered state of consciousness at the very minimum, in order to really work with these compounds. And at a really fundamental level, if I'm putting patients through an experience, if I don't really know the parameters of that myself, I'm not aware as a researcher or even ethically, I think, to hold that space for them in a safe way. So that's my personal take. I think there was a survey done of psychedelic research. I think over 90% of those have actually taken a psychedelic.
Yeah.
And actually now, even within our own research groups, there's a lot of healthy volunteer trials that occur where some of us will take part in studies. So I'm doing one with psilocybin at UCL with some colleagues at the end of this month, and some of those colleagues will come and do our DMT studies, and I guess it's an important way for us to also acknowledge and appreciate the guinea pig nature of psychedelic research, because we're here kind of putting probes and asking people to do all these tasks whilst also under such like a kind of a disrupted state of mind. So I think not only we need to understand what psychedelics are personally, but I think putting ourselves into lab-based settings is important, so we know what we're doing to others and how much.
I love what you shared, and I think it's really important, not because we can describe what the experience is like, but so that we can share the fact that it's not something that's necessarily just cool and fun and interesting to explore, but that actually it's going to require of you to face some of the most challenging moments of your life. And for psychedelics that facilitate a return to certain repressed memories, you are quite literally re-experiencing that, not from the perspective that you necessarily have in your waking state, but from the state that you were in when you first experienced it. I shared with Jamie that I've worked with psilocybin for many years and I got a lot from it, but I still felt there was some repressed memories that I wasn't quite able to access. And so I went to sit with Iboga.
Oh, right.
And I found that over, it's a 30-hour ceremony.
Yeah.
2 nights where you're still kind of in it in between. And if you'd have told me 5 or 6 years ago about Iboga, I would have said absolutely no chance. That sounds like my idea of hell. Mushrooms seems quite appealing because of all the nice stories that I'd heard. I quickly learned that it was actually a lot more challenging, but Iboga I was ready for. But the experience on Iboga for me was these repressed memories that not only could I not identify what they were, what shape they had, or when they were, I had no idea what they then led to. I was just aware that there was something in my day-to-day life that wasn't right. And most notably for me, it was OCD.
Okay, yeah.
And OCD obviously is a coping mechanism. So it's a way to assert control over a future that you can't control. It's closely tied to anxiety. And it's something that had become so normal in my waking life that I just accepted that it was part of me. In this Iboga ceremony, the way that I experienced it was that it was almost like having a TV screen in my mind.
Yeah.
And when my eyes were closed, it was like 10,000 tabs on a laptop, and every tab individually would come up, would play the video of the memory, but I would also feel exactly how I felt when the memory took place. And in the case of OCD, I was able to pinpoint the exact memory that triggered the pattern of OCD. So I went back to being 3 years old in my home, and my dad's car had been stolen from outside the house. And I woke up and my parents explained to me that the car had been stolen, someone had taken it in the middle of the night. And I immediately had this feeling of a lack of safety. And so that night when I went to bed to try and feel safe, my brain said, okay, if you get up and you touch the wardrobe 5 times, nothing bad will happen. And of course, confirmation bias, the next morning, nothing bad happened. No one came in the night. So I then used that as a crutch. And over time, that behavior compounds so that I forgot what caused it in the first place. And it became so normal in my everyday life. The fear that I felt as a grown man, remembering being a 3-year-old and having that experience, was exactly the same as the first experience. But I had the perspective to change the way that I addressed the fear. And so I can say that since I had that experience around 8 months ago, I've not had a single incident of OCD.
Wow.
And what makes me so motivated to have this conversation openly is that quite literally changed my life. And for me, it was OCD, which was debilitating. It was painful at times, but it wasn't drug abuse. It wasn't suicide. It wasn't anything else. But there are people that have memories that have caused those outcomes. And how dare we legislate that something that grows naturally on this planet not be accessible to people that can need it when it can make such an impact? And having had that direct personal experience, I feel so strongly that it should be made available to people that need it,
Hmm.
not numb them with pharmaceuticals, not sit them in talk therapy for years, not have them distracted through the culturally accepted means of not thinking about and suppressing the things that have happened to you. So I think it's really, really important that we do share stories of our experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and we do it in the way that you've just done it, which is not to necessarily just celebrate how cool it is and the pretty things that you see,
Mm-hmm.
but actually for how difficult it is, but also for those that are ready, the ability that it has to quite literally change your life.
Yeah, that's a really powerful story that I mean, I've never heard of Iboga's use in OCD before. I've heard about it a lot in opiate addiction, and that's really like an area where there's a lot of research. It's really, I know Michael Pollan calls 5-MeO-DMT the Everest of psychedelics, but I'm pretty sure Iboga's like a double Everest.
Well, I think 5-MeO is pretty up there as well. I had a pretty good experience on that as well. But I think it is. And I don't know if you've got any, you've probably got a better understanding of the research than I have. But when I reviewed, I mean, as with all of these things, and I have to caveat, really important to do your own research.
Yeah.
Really important to speak to people about it.
Mm-hmm.
Really important to take your time to make the decision to step into this. Really important to do your research around who you're doing it with.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think I have to say that.
Yeah.
Secondly, within my own research, what I saw was the efficacy of Iboga for its treatment of addiction was profound.
Yeah.
And it outperforms almost anything else in existence.
Yeah.
I saw there was the case of a large percentage of people that had PTSD from combat zones, that had opioid addiction, alcohol addiction, quite literally in one session of Ibogaine, which is alkaloid, as you know, of Iboga, and never touching it again, or at least not touching it for a very long time afterwards and since. So I don't know if you can speak to the efficacy of that respect.
It's Ibogaine, Iboga is obviously a plant. Well, it's a shrub which grows and is used ceremonially in Gabon in certain tribes, and I think it's been used for at least 2,000 to 3,000 years. And there's all of these different alkaloids that come from the plant, and Ibogaine is one of those, which was researched quite a lot in the 90s by a woman called Deborah Mash in the US. And she funded, and the NIH, which is the kind of government funder, they funded loads of studies predominantly looking at opioid addiction, because I think in the 1930s there was this French physician that really isolated its compound and saw that it was potentially helpful in a few case studies, but she really did the first systematic studies of Ibogaine. And Ibogaine is a bit of a dirty drug in the sense that we don't really know its like receptor pharmacology binding. And so trying to understand why drugs work is quite central to the work that I'm involved in. And we know like a lot of classic psychedelics like DMT, LSD, psilocybin, they work on a specific serotonin receptor in the brain, and that's kind of the lock and key to the hallucinations and potentially clinical benefit. But with Ibogaine, it kind of binds to loads of different receptors, opioid receptors, dopamine receptors, GABA, noradrenaline receptors. And as you said, it lasts 30 hours. So it's really kind of a powerful experience. One of the things we're concerned about a little bit with Ibogaine is actually the risk related to the heart. So a lot of Ibogaine research stopped in the 90s because there were some deaths in clinical trials. And it was particularly related to how it interacts with a certain serotonin receptor on the heart, and it led to atrial fibrillation, which is basically the precursor to heart attack. So some people are definitely, I mean, most people are prone to having this elongation in their heart rhythm under Ibogaine. It puts a lot of stress on the heart. But there's one biotech taking it forward right now called Atai Life Sciences, and they've acquired the data from some of this early work by Deborah Mash and some recent work. And they're looking at different derivatives. So now they're looking at noribogaine, which is a specific enantiomer of Ibogaine, and some other kind of chemical versions. I think Ibogaine really has like huge potential, really, to really solve the fentanyl crisis in the US, which is like seeing 130,000 people die a year. In the UK, we're seeing increasing numbers of people with opiate addiction. Opiate addiction rates are just increasing year on year. It's one of the hardest addictions to overcome. One of the reasons why we think it works in opiate addiction is because opiates like heroin or fentanyl bind to specific opioid receptors in the brain called the mu-opioid receptor. When you bind it to that receptor, it sits on it for a while and then it peels off. When it peels off, that's when withdrawal starts to happen, and that's when people can start to actually maybe even die from withdrawal. And so that receptor needs to be kind of stuck into at all time. Right now, current treatments for opiate addiction rely on substitution therapies, so methadone and buprenorphine are prescribed drugs which sit in that receptor. They're safer opiates. So it doesn't actually solve the problem. We don't have any real disease-modifying drugs for opioid addiction. We just have something else sit in the receptor that's not heroin. But now what we think Ibogaine might be doing, so some good preclinical work, is showing that what it does is it changes the conformation of those receptors. So instead of the receptors being quite needy and wanting something to sit inside it, it actually changes the physical conformation of them, so it no longer wants or needs, at the very molecular level, the drug to sit inside it. So if we can start to understand the mechanism at that kind of molecular biology level, we can start to understand why these drugs may be so powerful, because they really are changing the part of opiate addiction which is driving the disorder, which is this conformational change in these receptors. This is very sciencey, this chat, but that's why we think it's beneficial. I think there's a lot of potential for Ibogaine. I don't know whether it's likely to be delivered as a treatment unless so we try to do research with Ibogaine at Hammersmith Hospital, and there's no A&E department there. We wanted to do the world's first brain imaging scans under individuals with Ibogaine, and it would have been really cool because we could have actually tried to test these hypotheses in humans, whether it changes mu-opioid receptor conformation. But because there isn't an A&E department where you can do resus in case somebody does have a heart attack, it would have to take place in...
But it's legal in the US, correct? There are some states that it's legal. There are Ibogaine clinics in the US where it's legal in some states, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know in
incorrect.
Mexico, in Mexico, it's definitely legal. In New Zealand as well. And I think there are some clinics that operate under some psychedelic churches, maybe, to get around the legislation. I think there's a lot of potential there. It's just a lot. I've actually never done Ibogaine. I'm frankly too scared, to be honest with you. But
it took me a while to get to that one, but it was
In terms of some of the things we talked about here, addiction, OCD, we mentioned anxiety, treatment-resistant depression. There's this narrative that certainly I've tuned into around the potential benefits of psychedelics when we think of mental health challenges that are highly organized. So these sort of rigid structures of the brain where we're going, OCD, addiction, where it's very fixed behavior patterns. Is that where the majority of the research is steered towards, where we are seeing people battle against perhaps more rigid and fixed challenges that they're facing?
Yeah, so I guess there's a concept of types of mental health disorders. Broadly, you can put it into two categories. So you've got your internalizing psychopathologies, which are based around thought processes that are rigid, that are practical to the individual as a way of reducing their stress. So for the internalizing disorders, they include OCD, because they're repetitive disorders, they're kind of thought-based, depression as well, anxiety disorders, addictions, even PTSD, eating disorders, chronic pain. They all kind of fit in these internalizing disorders. And then you have externalizing psychopathologies, and they include disorders like schizophrenia, personality disorders, and they're more exhibited by a kind of outward projection of the mind, which comes across in hallucinations or manic episodes. Now, what we think psychedelics do, and what we know they do from brain imaging, is that they have this ability to disrupt the brain's control centers. And one of those is the default mode network. And a lot of research is really focused on how psychedelics impact the default mode network. And the default mode network, we think, is quite critical in maintaining the psychiatric disorders' negative thought loops.
Can I just check understanding on that? So what we're saying is that psychedelics interrupt the default mode network, which is essentially when we observe an object or a person, it's the brain's ability to circumvent our understanding of what that is. So let's say that, I see a tree and I name that as that's this particular tree, or that's a red car. By disabling that, I'm able to then see it without the cultural, the social, the historical lens that I've attached to it. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, our brains are very efficient organs. We actually don't need to use much of it. And that's important because if we were to use all of our brains, we wouldn't be able to eat enough in order for us to survive and thrive. So minimizing the amount of metabolism in our brain is central to our survival. So much of what we see and interpret in our sensory input in life is based on previous memories and thoughts. And so our brain is very good at kind of saying, I know that that's a light because I've seen that white light before. But then also, in the same way, when it comes to mental health conditions, just like you described when you were 3, your experience of that traumatic incident of the car being stolen, and then you using a safety response that then gave you that feeling of safety, that was attached to a neural pathway that ingrained that memory into a survival code. And so your brain then thought, okay, instead of constantly looking out for whether there's thieves or cars on the road, which could be quite energy intensive for you, I know that I can circumvent that just by doing these taps every day, which is less energy intensive. And so the brain short-circuited that behavior as a way to survive in order to reduce that threat. So the brain is very good at cementing these pathways for our survival. And the default mode network is the kind of master controller of the brain to keep the brain in that rhythm. So all of these things we've ever learned in life, my name, my existence of self, my thoughts, my feelings, my behaviors, are mediated by this brain network, which really governs who we are and who we think we are.
The ego, essentially.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why I think it's so terrifying as we do high dose psychedelics, or the more powerful psychedelics, is because it essentially means that we lose identification with the self. If you're doing 7-8 grams upwards of psilocybin mushrooms or 5-MeO DMT, you are quite literally forgetting who you are. You're disassociating from the self, which is probably the most terrifying thing. And it links back to like the religious texts say is to die before you die, right? That's essentially what it is. You are dying to yourself. Your experience of the world ending is another way of dying to yourself. You are no longer you are.
Yeah.
But actually on this other side of that is this most liberating of perspectives, because you realize that it wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
And it actually gives you a greater appreciation and perspective as you come back into this world. I'd be interested to know a little bit about any of the trials you've done with other psychedelics, and most interested in DMT, because I'm interested to hear how that's gone down in a clinical setting, because before I'd ever done Bufo, Jamie and I were in Mexico, and we were talking about Bufo, 5-MeO DMT, and watching the videos of people have that experience made me never want to go near it in my life.
Yeah.
Because it's terrifying even just seeing people experience it. So yeah, I'd love to know a little bit about that particular psychedelic.
Yeah, so 5-MeO DMT from Bufo. So for those that don't know about it, it's actually quite a recently discovered psychedelic. There's, I think in the 70s or 80s, there was a book written about it. And
I want to know who discovered it, because it's toad venom.
Yeah, who was licking toads first?
Who was licking toads first?
Yeah. I think it's a guy called Charles something. I forgot the full name, but in the Sonoran Desert, which is kind of a very like arid land, there were these big frogs, Bufo alvarius, or toads even, and somehow someone decided to start milking the glands of this toad. And in that process, decided to also ingest it.
I have questions for this guy.
Same.
So many questions.
I have so many questions.
I have a lot of appreciation for him as well.
Yeah. So that process was discovered by some individual, and that was shared throughout the world. And then it was kind of really concentrated, the use of it in Mexico at the time. Then I became aware of 5 probably like 4 years ago, really kind of after the whole psilocybin work and after some DMT work that Dr. Chris Timmerman and others at my group started. And David Nutt and Robin Carhart Harris, who are two professors, we were on a call. I remember them saying, "Oh, have you heard about this 5?" And I was like, "Well, what the hell is this?" And then it's got such like a long, convoluted name, 5-MeO-DMT. I was like, "This sounds interesting, also just a little bit weird." And then there was talk of companies starting up biotechs essentially to develop this compound for addiction and depression, and it was a 10-15 minute journey, so very quick, probably a little bit quicker than DMT when it's smoked. And I'd seen on Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia some videos of individuals thrashing around. So what 5-MeO-DMT does is very different in its experience to DMT. So the experience of DMT, which is kind of like the shorter acting psychedelic that most people have heard of, a lot of people describe engagements with entities or going into a portal of a different realm and having conversations with entities. And so the visual field is quite full. There's lots of various, kind of like insights that you get more kind of from like looking at things.
You also float into it rather than explode into it, I would say. It's the main difference.
Depends if you get injected.
Yeah. I've heard some conversations with the guys who have done like long intravenous
the DMT.
Yes. Yeah. Which sounds brutal, to be honest.
Yeah. I've personally not done it. I've known people that have, who are really kind of avid psychonauts, and they've really struggled. So DMTX was a procedure that some of our group decided to invent to understand the phenomenology of that world and try to explore that world in more rich detail, and the neurophenomenology as well. And so it works by essentially putting an intravenous tube into somebody's vein in their arm, and then using a bolus infusion. So that's kind of like a kind of a big hit at the start to kind of get you up to about 8 out of 10 intensity within a minute or so, and then using these machines which can stabilize what's called the pharmacokinetics of the drug, and extending it out to 30 minutes. And some colleagues of mine in Zurich have extended it to 90 minutes. Yeah, it's quite avant-garde and really cutting edge stuff.
What was the feedback?
I feel like your face is going, "Where do I sign up?" and my face is going, "Fuck no."
What was the feedback?
So I spoke to some of the lead researchers, and I mean, the people that do these studies are really kind of avid psychonauts who are really well prepared. I think even for some of them it was really challenging, really disorientating, but for others it was fascinating and really insightful, and they managed to really understand what it is that they were trying to seek in that world. A lot of people who are DMT psychonauts often have similar entity families that they revisit, and they can then kind of have these relationships with these with these beings that might help them. And so there's this kind of sub niche of individuals that really go back to that space quite a lot in order to kind of get guidance. So I think for those individuals, spending a lot of time in that world was cool.
I think my feeling is that it's supposed to be that short. That's my feeling.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and I understand why they do it from a perspective of it's hard in that level of intensity over a brief period of time to bring a huge amount back. You might have glimpses. You know, we've had very similar experiences. We've had some actually shared experiences in that
where
realm.
We've literally seen the same thing.
The exact same
at the
thing.
same time.
Really fascinating.
Well, we're my colleague Tommaso is actually doing this study right now called the hyperscanning study.
Okay.
So it's really fascinating. So you get strangers together who've never met and people that do know each other, and both of them will take DMT infusions at the same time, and we do EEG signaling on them, and then we ask them to do eye gazing and to transmit information just with thought alone, to try to understand whether DMT can enable telepathy.
Wow.
And so some of the results from that study will be out hopefully in the next year and a half. I was very nearly going to take part in it, and then I decided to back out.
How does that's fascinating. We've had that experience,
but that study's still recruiting.
Yeah.
If anyone is interested.
Sorry, I wanted to ask you. So the difference between DMT and 5-MeO DMT, like from my experience, is that from smoking DMT, it's a slower drop. It's a drop in, but it feels more like a feather dropping in. Whereas 5-MeO DMT feels like a rocket ship that goes at the speed of light. So what's happening in the body, in the brain? What's different about the two?
Yeah, so I think we don't know really yet with 5-MeO DMT. There's been one study published on the way that the brain networks are organized. The brain is organized in a way where there's kind of hierarchical organization. So your visual systems will kind of communicate with the visual systems. Your emotional systems will connect with your emotional systems, and your memory systems kind of tie in. And this way of segregating brain function, as I mentioned before, is really important to kind of keep the brain using as less energy as possible. What this first study done by colleagues at UCL found that when people were under the influence of 5-MeO DMT in a retreat setting, there was a collapse of this hierarchical gradient. So there was this massive interconnectivity that occurred between the visual systems, the memory, the emotional circuits, and so on. And essentially that collapse in that hierarchical gradient leads to this state of, I guess, discombobulation of the mind and the brain. Like the brain and the mind are completely collapsed in, and there's not structure in that sense.
I can relate.
And so that maybe that rise or that shooting up at a neural level might be the brain kind of zapping out of the confirmation.
The thing that I find most interesting about this, though, is that something is aware of that happening. So I think when you see people thrashing around, the crazy thing is, even though it feels like a rocket ship and you're shot out somewhere, awareness is still present. And there's a consciousness that is aware of that experience. And so you have the opportunity to, and I think the difference between people that thrash around and people that look like they're asleep is the ability to surrender to the experience, that conscious mind to surrender to what is happening. And I had that direct experience.
Yeah.
It's like with the difference between DMT and Butho is with DMT, you do your one hit, you're kind of in it. It probably takes you 3 good hits to get there. Butho is one hit and you don't know. So it's one hit. You no longer have a hand, a mouth, anything. You can't feel it, you can't see it, it's not there, but the awareness is still there. So my experience was hit, and oh my God, my body is not breathing. Oh my God, I don't have a body. Where is my body?
Yeah.
That was the first reaction that I had. And I can imagine that had I gone to panic from that point, I would have been thrashing around. Where I was, a question came to mind. Was it me? Was it part of me? I don't know. But the question was, can you die? Can you surrender? And it was like, oh yeah. And just drop into it. And the minute I did that, it was endless white light in all directions. And it was just the most beautiful experience I've ever had.
Did you choose to die in that?
Yes.
You made, okay.
Yes, die, surrender, whatever. We're limited by language, right? But it was a thing of, I was panicking in the first few seconds because I thought, well, maybe I'm not breathing, maybe my body's dead, and I had to accept that was a possibility. And as soon as I did that, it opened up to this endless white light in all directions, and it was like, as a man, I don't remember the last time I was held. Probably when I was like a baby, a couple of years old, or my mum picked me up when I was falling over when I was 4 or 5 or something. It felt like the whole universe was holding me, and it was just endless white light in all direction. And the main thing that I took from that experience was the illusion of fear, that fear not being real, and that all of us carry around this fear of death, and that a lot of our behavior stems from us being in fear of death and therefore trying to avoid anything that's close to death or could lead to death. That's our day-to-day experience. What I took from that was there is no fear of death. You just experienced it. And so the decisions that you make day to day are no longer based around not dying, but living, right?
Yeah.
That was
I guess it's that I see this in how we've spoken about psychedelic experiences as well in the past, this constant dialogue or interrelationship between finite ego mind, default mode network, and self consciousness, awareness, the kind of unconscious piece of the puzzle, and seeing there falling into that fear or that panic is very much a function of that ego mind.
Yeah.
And that's the control piece, the not letting go piece. But if you can move beyond that, whether it's in a deep meditation practice or whether that's in 5-MeO, there's kind of blunt force tools and slightly more subtle practices. It feels, certainly experientially, like a very similar relational dynamic. And we've spoken about dosage of psilocybin in the past, and I feel actually something like a 5-gram dose changes that relationship to such a point where you're not in a battle between the two. For me, the most uncomfortable dose I've ever experienced of psilocybin is around 2.5 grams, because it almost feels like it's not enough to
tip the ego.
to take the ego down enough to
You
allow
have to do
that
some
opening.
work.
You've got to really fight, and you're kind of in this friction between the two. And so I think that's my, I guess, felt sense, embodied sense.
I think
of what's actually at
it's
play.
important to say as well that whilst I believe that these substances can be amazing tools, there comes a point where you just have to go away and really sit with what you've experienced. And I had this recently where I had a really challenging situation come up, and the voice in my head was, it was almost like the ability to go and sit in ceremony became like, I need to go and sit in ceremony.
You need to what?
I need to go and sit in ceremony. I need to go and sit with mushrooms, sit with something.
Yeah.
And then another voice comes to mind as I start to journal, and I was going, no, you don't. Because you know exactly what's going to come up in ceremony. What these ceremonies have given me over the years, over the last few years that I've been doing them, is the ability to ask myself the right questions and to hold the mirror up where before I wasn't even aware there was a mirror.
Yeah.
Right? So what I did instead was, okay, if I was to go and sit with mushrooms right now, what would the experience be? What would I be shown? And it was, this is where I made this decision. This is where I made this.
Yeah.
So without having to go and take the psychedelics, because of the past experience of taking them, I can sit and ask myself the right questions in meditation, on a walk, in journaling, that mimics the experience. Or so a tool I can call on more practically is a breathwork experience. For example, there's other modalities, but I feel like, at least for me, and this is very, very individual, without those first experiences of psychedelics, I wouldn't be able to now use other tools. I wouldn't have been able to hold that mirror up in the first place. And that's where I think they're most powerful. If you're in addiction, if you can't break out of a cycle, I think they're such potent tools to move you beyond that and then give you other tools and bring other tools into use. But I don't necessarily believe, if in my own case, that I need to sit with mushrooms every year, every 2 years, that I probably ever need to sit with Iboga again, that I probably ever need to sit with ayahuasca again, like quite literally. And that's what I meant about the opposite of being addictive.
Yeah.
I never need to do Iboga again.
Yeah.
But I'm bloody grateful that I did it.
Yeah.
You know?
I think they're potent tools and technologies to really illuminate the fact that we have all the answers. And sometimes it takes a bit of guidance to get there, and it might take a slightly altered state of consciousness if you're stuck in particular ruts or patterns. But that's exactly what you're speaking to, right? It's like once you've had those experiences, you actually find it more accessible to tune into those answers when you need them. And it's interesting, I was thinking this earlier when we were talking about, I suppose, the addictive nature or the addictive perception. I guess my sense, having been in the sphere of psychedelics, both kind of underground and otherwise, is that there are people who return and return and return.
Yeah.
Not necessarily chemically addictive, but perhaps ontologically addictive or experientially addictive. And I guess where, as we move towards the close, I would love to, we could sit here and talk about the benefits and the wonderful things all day. What are some of the where's some of the nuance, where's some of the balance, where we look at maybe things like the impact of some of the misinformation that's out there, some of the myths, some of the risks? What do people need to know if they're listening to this going, sign me up for all of that and some. I'll take a clinical trial and I'll take an off-grid retreat. What should they be thinking carefully about on an individual level?
Yeah, I think picking up on what we've just discussed right now is that there is an element that I'm seeing more of today, which concerns me in the sense of the popularism of psychedelics, to the extent that it's now seen as kind of cool, and everyone wants to be somewhat involved in this mind-altering culture that surrounds it. And with that comes a lot of what I call, and what many people call, spiritual bypassing. So they have the outfits, they know all of the songs, they, you know, live this kind of pseudo hippie lifestyle, except they live in like a detached house in Richmond. And there's nothing wrong with the culture around it, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to live that detached from the matrix life, but with that comes a responsibility, as she said, that when you engage with the plant medicine, to actually give it the reverence and respect that it deserves. It's not a tool to keep coming back to. It shouldn't necessarily be used that way. A lot of people enjoy being in the kind of the ceremonial setting and keep going back, as you mentioned, maybe more for face and to be part of a community and to be seen to be doing this thing. And I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about the dangers of individuals not being fully informed or prepared for these experiences. Just because they're in vogue right now doesn't mean that it's right for everyone to go and do a psychedelic experience. You really have to enter it prepared, ready and informed about what it is, because these are fundamentally life-changing. It's changed my life. I've heard it's changed your life and all of our lives here. So that's the first thing, is to kind of know what you're getting yourself in for.
There's something just come to mind, actually, as you were talking about the detached house in Richmond crew.
Richmond's a lovely area.
Wonderful area.
I live in Fulham down there. I'd love to have a detached house in Richmond.
But
nothing wrong with it.
We're in a real renaissance of what Ken Wilber, whose work I really love at the moment. We're in a renaissance of waking up technologies. We're in this phase of human development where people are desiring waking up. What Ken Wilber says is that waking up in the absence of growing up is dangerous. And what he means by growing up is ego development, moving from egocentric to more world-centric organization of the ego and the psyche. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of, is people who perhaps are waking up to this, you know, God consciousness, or their own, you know, whatever they want to call it, oneness, without actually having done the shadow work and the introspection to be able to say, oh, that experience wasn't telling me that I am God, and therefore I develop a Messiah complex, and I think that I am God's gift, but actually that we are all God, for people who want to use that language. And Ram Dass, they always give the example of Ram Dass, who had this beautiful enlightenment experience, this waking up experience, and dropped into that place of, you know, we are all one, we're all love, we're all God. And then his brother, who was in an asylum, saying, I am God, I'm Jesus, because they'd had similar experiences of enlightenment, but without the scaffolding and the ego development to hold that experience. And I think that's something that in modern society that is in part narcissistic, in part egocentric, when we meet that with these powerful waking up technologies, it can be a really dangerous thing, as we kind of see this ego expansion and inflation as much as we see ego dissolution.
There's this prevailing theory of psychedelics, which one of my bosses, Professor Robin Carr Harris, came up with. It's called Rebus, and Rebus stands for relaxed beliefs under psychedelics, and it's a mechanism which we think is transdiagnostic. It helps to relax your prior beliefs around fears and OCD or addiction behaviors or root cause of depression, so that you're able to reintegrate into society, because the weights on those belief systems have been reduced. So your brain is updated with new information from the psychedelic that recalibrates the beliefs. So that's one model, these relaxed beliefs. But there's an opposing theory called CBUS, which is strengthened beliefs under psychedelics. And that describes actually whatever that psychological state that you're in can actually be amplified. Because what I think psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers of context.
Yes.
So if you're in a container which amplifies that egocentric narrative, then that will become of you. And you see it in psychedelic communities. You've seen it historically, Charles Manson, for example. You've seen it in many, many different cults and organizations around the world that have used psychedelics in the wrong way. So I don't think psychedelics, and you asked me at the start of the podcast whether the net benefit is good for society. I think yes, net benefit, but we will see more and more of the kind of harms because of this CBUS reactivity happening in certain groups and individuals.
It's the same with all technology, right? It's like it's non-correlative that more ceremonies, more psychedelics equals more wisdom, more breakthroughs. But it's the same as, let's talk about in the context of social media. Social media is neither good nor bad. It's the consciousness behind it that makes it so. And the dose is the poison. Us using social media for 30 minutes a day, 40 minutes a day, sharing photos with family, friends, finding research, finding interesting topics, incredibly beneficial. Doom scrolling for 9 hours a day, potentially not, you know? So I think it's the same with psychedelics. For the right person, at the right time of their life, in the right dose, in the right setting, for the right intention, amazing outcome. At the wrong time, in the wrong setting, at the wrong dose, too often, poor outcome. Yeah. Right. So it's like it's new. There's a lot of nuance that needs to be applied. I wanted to round things off with asking you what your hopes are for this space and what you're most excited about that you see happening at the moment. I think we all agree that there's so much potential here, and you're very much in it. So I'd love to hear, how you feel about it.
Yeah, I guess when I started this work in 2018, it was a fringe science. We were the first centre in the world that were formalised to actually research this. So probably count about 15 psychedelic researchers globally at that time. And at that time, it was really just, what does it do in the brain? Might it work in depression? 7 years on, there's now, as I mentioned, 108 clinical trials going on. There's about 30 or 40 different psychedelic research centres in the world. There's the finishing of like the MDMA phase 3 for PTSD, psilocybin phase 3 for treatment-resistant depression. There's a lot of work being done now, which I'm involved in, which is looking at not just the science, but like how we integrate this into the NHS or into public health systems. So I work working and having conversations really with the Department of Health and the NHS, treatment pathway boards and reinsurance and insurance firms in the US about how they can actually build the infrastructure and the facilities to actually deliver it. So the thing I'm most excited for, which I never anticipated ever happening, is that the reality of psychedelic medicine is potentially inevitable. Just last week, my boss set up the first ketamine clinic in the NHS for psychiatric patients at St. Charles Hospital. So that is the first real patient in the UK to undergo ketamine-assisted therapy free in the NHS, who's had a lifetime of depression. And that service is now rolling out under, hopefully, in that trust and then hopefully in other trusts. So the thing I'm mostly fascinated in now is that the science is great. And it's really exciting, and it's cool to know about the brain. It's cool to know about what happens. But if we can't get it into patients' bedsides, then it's a waste of our time. So I think in the next 3 years, we're going to see the rollout of these treatments in mental health. That's the thing that excites me and thrills me the most. So this is no longer a fringe science. I don't even think it's no longer even niche to talk about psychedelics. I think that conversation is happening at so many levels. I was in the US about a month ago speaking to people from the Department of Health there, and they're all pretty encouraged by it. So the reality of psychedelic medicine will happen. It's more of a matter of when rather than if at this point.
I think we'll leave it there. Thank you as always, my man. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.